My parents left me to bleed out so they could celebrate my brother's success. Now they're the ones. I'm Madison, 32 years old, lying on my bathroom floor, watching my blood pool around me. The deep gash on my arm won't stop bleeding. Downstairs, my parents just received a call about my brother Jason's big achievement. "We'll be right there to celebrate," my mother exclaims while I'm calling for help. They chose him. They always have. Could our relationship ever heal after this betrayal? Before I continue my story, let me know where you're watching from in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you've ever felt invisible in your own family. My childhood home in Boston was picture perfect from the outside. A beautiful colonial in an upscale neighborhood with my father, Thomas, working as a senior partner at a prestigious law firm, and my mother, Laura, running her successful pediatric practice. But inside those walls, I learned early that perfection was the only acceptable standard. From the moment I started school, my parents made their expectations crystal clear. A minus was a disappointment. Second place in the science fair was failure. Piano recitals needed to be flawless. I was their first attempt at parenting, and they approached raising me with the same precision and demand for excellence they applied to their careers. I remember sitting at our mahogany dining table doing homework while my father stood over me pointing out every minor error. "Madison attorneys don't make careless mistakes. Try again." My mother was more subtle but equally demanding. "Sweetheart, the Williams girl got accepted to that summer program. What do you think went wrong with your application?" Despite the pressure, I desperately wanted their approval. I practiced piano until my fingers cramped, studied until midnight even in elementary school, and joined every extracurricular activity I could manage. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of pride in my father's eyes when I brought home another award, but it always felt fleeting, conditional. Everything changed when I was 8 years old. My brother Jason was born, and from the beginning he was special. My parents called him their miracle baby, after years of believing they couldn't have another child. Where I had been met with expectations, Jason was met with wonder. "Look how quickly he's learning to read," my mother would exclaim when he was 4, even though I had read at an even earlier age. "He has a natural gift for numbers," my father would boast when Jason solved a simple math problem, though my math achievements had only ever been acknowledged with a nod. As we grew, the disparity in how we were treated became more pronounced. My straight A's were expected, his were celebrated with dinner at expensive restaurants. When I was accepted into the honors program, my parents simply said, "Good, that should help with college applications." When Jason made the regular gifted program 2 years later, they framed the certificate. I still remember my high school graduation. I was valedictorian, had received a scholarship to Tufts University, and had been accepted into their pre-med program. My speech received a standing ovation from everyone except my parents, who remained seated checking their watches. Later that night, they hosted a dinner party for their colleagues and spent the evening discussing Jason's middle school science project rather than my accomplishments. "He could be the next Einstein," my father announced proudly to his law partners. I stood in the corner of our living room, college acceptance letter in hand, completely invisible. By the time I left for college, I had developed a painful understanding of my place in our family hierarchy. I was the trial run the practice child. Jason was the masterpiece. Still, I couldn't extinguish the hope that achieving enough might finally earn their recognition. I threw myself into my pre-med studies with renewed determination. Surely, becoming a doctor like my mother would finally make her see me as an equal, a success, someone worthy of the Carter family name. My dorm room became my sanctuary in prison. While other freshmen were exploring campus life, I was hunched over textbooks, determined to ace every test, impress every professor. I graduated in the top 2% of my class, but when I called home with the news, my mother's response was, "That's nice, dear. Did you hear Jason was selected for the National Math Olympiad?" Despite these constant disappointments, I kept pushing forward. I was accepted into a top medical school, following in my mother's footsteps, but choosing a different specialty. I wanted to forge my own path in emergency medicine rather than pediatrics. Even this choice was met with questions rather than support. Emergency medicine, but that's so unpredictable, and the hours are terrible. my mother said during one of our rare phone calls. I always pictured you in something more suitable. The unspoken comparison hung in the air. More suitable like pediatrics. More suitable like her. I didn't have to ask what she meant by suitable. It meant something that wouldn't embarrass them if their colleagues asked about their daughter. My first year of medical school nearly broke me. The workload was immense, but more crushing was the weight of knowing that no matter how well I performed, it would never be enough. I developed insomnia, sometimes going 3 days without proper sleep. My hands would shake during practical exams, and panic attacks became a regular occurrence in bathroom stalls between classes. It was during one of these breakdowns that I met Sarah. She found me hyperventilating in the women's restroom, tears streaming down my face as I struggled to breathe. Instead of awkwardly backing away as others had done, she sat down next to me on the cold tile floor. "Deep breaths," she said calmly. "In through the nose, out through the mouth. That's it." Sarah was a second-year medical student who recognized the signs of extreme anxiety. After I calmed down, she insisted on buying me coffee. Over steaming cups in the campus cafe, I found myself sharing things I had never told anyone. About the constant pressure, the impossible standards, the feeling of never measuring up. "Madison, this isn't normal," she said after listening intently. "Have you ever thought about talking to someone professionally?" I laughed bitterly. My parents would see that as another failure. "But they don't need to know," Sarah pointed out. "The university has confidential counseling services. And honestly, from what you've just told me, it sounds like you're dealing with some pretty serious anxiety and depression." It took 3 more panic attacks before I finally took her advice. Dr. Thompson was a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a direct approach that somehow made it easier to open up. In our first session, I spent the entire hour recounting my childhood, the constant comparisons to Jason, and my desperate need for parental approval. "What you're describing sounds like conditional love," she explained gently. "Your parents have tied their affection to achievement, and that's created a pattern where you never feel secure in their love or your own worth." Over the next few months, Dr. Thompson helped me recognize the toxic patterns in my family dynamics and how they had shaped my self-perception. I learned that my anxiety and depression weren't signs of weakness, but natural responses to years of emotional neglect. "You've been trying to earn love that should have been freely given," she told me during one particularly difficult session. "That's an impossible task, Madison. No achievement will ever be enough because the problem isn't with you. It's with their inability to love unconditionally." This realization was both liberating and devastating. It meant I could stop blaming myself for my parents' emotional distance, but it also meant accepting that I might never have the relationship with them that I craved. Despite these revelations, I couldn't bring myself to confront my parents or set boundaries. Years of conditioning had left me terrified of disappointing them further. So I continued my therapy in secret, graduated from medical school with honors, and secured a residency position at Massachusetts General Hospital in Boston, not far from my parents' home. The irony wasn't lost on me. After years of trying to escape their shadow, I had chosen to return to their orbit. Part of me still hoped that proximity might somehow bridge the emotional distance between us. My residency years were brutal, as they are for most doctors in training. 80-hour work weeks, overnight shifts, and the constant pressure of making life-or-death decisions took a toll. The anxiety I had begun to manage in medical school returned with a vengeance. I would wake up in cold sweats, convinced I had made a mistake that cost a patient their life, even on my days off. My colleagues seemed to handle the pressure better, or at least they hid their struggles more effectively. I felt isolated, inadequate. The voice in my head that sounded suspiciously like my father's kept reminding me that Carters don't show weakness. Then came the incident that nearly ended my career before it truly began. After working 36 hours straight, I misread a medication dosage for an elderly patient. A vigilant nurse caught my error before any harm was done, but the near miss shattered what little confidence I had left. My attending physician, Dr. Winters, called me into his office afterward. I was certain he was going to dismiss me from the program. Instead, he looked at me with concern. "Madison, when was the last time you slept properly?" I couldn't remember. "This isn't sustainable," he said firmly. "You're a gifted doctor, but you're pushing yourself too hard. I'm mandating a 2-week leave of absence, and I strongly recommend you use this time to address whatever's driving this self-destructive behavior." I was devastated. In my mind, this mandatory break was confirmation of what I had always feared: I wasn't good enough. I couldn't handle what others could. I had failed. When I called Dr. Thompson in tears, she helped me reframe the situation. "This isn't punishment, Madison. It's an opportunity to prioritize your well-being, something you've never been taught to do." During those 2 weeks, I increased my therapy sessions and began to confront the deep-rooted beliefs that had been driving me to exhaustion. I realized that I had internalized my parents' impossible standards and become my own harshest critic. More dangerously, I had carried this dynamic into my professional life, where the cost of perfectionism could be measured in human lives. When I returned to work, I was more vigilant about maintaining boundaries and practicing self-care. I wasn't completely transformed, but I was making progress. I even declined a research opportunity that would have meant additional hours, something I never would have done before. As my residency progressed, I developed a reputation for being exceptionally thorough and compassionate with patients. I found I had a particular talent for calming anxious children in the emergency department, perhaps because I recognized the fear in their eyes all too well. I was approaching the end of my residency program and had my sights set on a fellowship in pediatric emergency medicine, combining my expertise with elements of my mother's field. Despite my progress in therapy, I still harbored hope that this career choice might finally earn her approval. Then came the day that would change everything. It was a Tuesday in late October, the kind of crisp autumn day that normally filled me with a sense of possibility. I had scheduled a meeting with the fellowship director to discuss my application, certain that my excellent evaluations and research contributions would secure me a position. Instead, I was informed that despite my qualifications, they had decided to offer the fellowship to another resident. Dr. Patel was apologetic but firm. "We can only accept one candidate this year due to budget constraints. Your work has been exemplary, Madison, but Dr. Reyes has published more extensively in the field." I nodded professionally, thanked him for the opportunity to apply, and walked calmly to my locker. Once inside the small private space, I pressed my forehead against the cool metal and fought back tears. This fellowship had been my goal for the past 3 years. More than that, it had been my chance to finally prove myself worthy to my mother, to show her that I could excel in a field adjacent to her own. My phone buzzed with a text from my brother Jason. "Big news, call me when you can." I ignored it and drove to my parents' house in a daze. They had been traveling in Europe for the past month, but I knew they had returned the previous day. I hadn't planned to visit, but suddenly I couldn't face going back to my empty apartment. Despite everything, some childish part of me still craved comfort from the very people who had always withheld it. The house was quiet when I arrived. I used my spare key and called out but received no answer. They must have stepped out. I headed upstairs to my old bedroom, which had been converted to a guest room years ago, carefully stripped of any evidence that I had ever lived there. Even the walls had been repainted from the lavender I had chosen to a neutral beige. I sat on the edge of the immaculately made bed, feeling like a stranger in what should have been my sanctuary. The disappointment of the day crashed over me in waves. Not just the fellowship, but the accumulation of a lifetime of striving and falling short in the eyes of those whose approval I desperately sought. I decided to take a shower, hoping the hot water might wash away some of the heaviness in my chest. In the adjoining bathroom, I turned the water to nearly scalding and stepped in, letting tears finally come. The steam enveloped me as I sobbed, releasing years of pent-up pain. When I finally emerged lightheaded from the heat and emotional release, I reached for a towel and knocked over a decorative glass shelf. It shattered, sending shards across the tiled floor. As I instinctively stepped back, my wet foot slipped, and I fell hard, my arm coming down directly on the broken glass. The pain was immediate and intense. Blood poured from a deep gash that ran from my inner elbow halfway to my wrist. I knew instantly that this was serious, likely requiring stitches and possibly damaging tendons or nerves. Ironic that as an emergency physician I could diagnose the severity while simultaneously feeling the victim's panic. I wrapped a hand towel around the wound, applying pressure as I had instructed countless patients to do, and called out for help. Mom, Dad, are you home? I need help. To my relief, I heard footsteps rushing up the stairs. My father's voice called out, Madison, when did you get here? I'm in the bathroom, I responded, my voice strained. I've cut myself badly. I need to get to the hospital. There was a pause outside the door. How bad is it? My father asked, making no move to enter. It's deep, possibly hitting tendons. I need stitches at minimum, I explained, trying to keep my voice steady as I watched blood seeping through the white towel. Can you drive me to the emergency room? Another pause. Then my mother's voice joined the conversation. Thomas Jason's on the phone. He got accepted to the National Research Fellowship at Johns Hopkins. He wants us to meet him for dinner to celebrate. My heart sank as I heard the excitement in her voice. The same fellowship program, different location. My brother had achieved what I had just failed to secure. Mom, did you hear me? I called more urgently. I'm bleeding pretty badly in here. Yes, honey, we heard you, my mother responded, her voice distracted. You're a doctor, can't you bandage it yourself? This is Jason's big moment. We promised we'd be there right away. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I need stitches, possibly surgery if there's tendon damage. I can't drive myself like this. My father cleared his throat uncomfortably. Madison, you know how to call an Uber. Or can't one of your friends take you? Jason's been working toward this fellowship for years. We can't miss his celebration. I've been working toward the same fellowship, I said, my voice breaking. I was rejected today. There was an awkward silence before my mother responded with forced brightness. Well, there's always next year for you, dear, but this is Jason's moment now. We need to go. You're choosing to leave me bleeding to celebrate with Jason? I asked incredulously, though I already knew the answer. Don't be so dramatic, Madison, my father said sternly. You've told us it's not life-threatening. Handle it like the adult you are. We'll check on you when we get back. I heard them walking away, discussing which restaurant Jason had chosen for the celebration. The front door closed, and the house fell silent except for the sound of my ragged breathing and the drip of water from the shower I had left running. In that moment, something inside me broke. The last thread of hope that I had been clinging to, the desperate belief that somewhere deep down my parents truly cared about me, snapped cleanly. The pain of the realization was sharper than the glass that had sliced my arm. With trembling fingers, I called Sarah. I need help, was all I managed to say before breaking into tears again. Sarah arrived 20 minutes later using the spare key I had given her years ago for emergencies. She gasped when she saw the amount of blood that had pooled on the bathroom floor. Jesus, Madison, this is serious, she said quickly, examining the wound with professional efficiency despite her obvious concern. We need to get you to the hospital now. In the car, as Sarah drove well above the speed limit, I felt strangely calm despite the throbbing pain and lightheadedness. It was as if the physical trauma had temporarily numbed the emotional one. At the hospital, my colleagues were shocked to see me wheeled in as a patient. The attending physician, Dr. Rivera, examined my arm with concern. You've lost a significant amount of blood, Dr. Carter. The cut has damaged some tendons, but fortunately missed major blood vessels. You'll need surgery to repair the damage. As they prepped me for surgery, Sarah sat by my bedside, her face tight with anger. I can't believe your parents just left you like that. Where are they now? Celebrating my brother's fellowship acceptance, I replied flatly. The same fellowship I was rejected from today. Sarah's expression darkened further. Have they even called to check on you? I glanced at my phone on the side table. No missed calls or messages from either parent. What do you think? The surgery lasted 3 hours. The damage was more extensive than initially assessed, requiring meticulous repair of 2 tendons and dozens of stitches. When I awoke in the recovery room groggy from anesthesia, Sarah was still there. Dr. Rivera said you were lucky, she informed me. If you'd lost much more blood or waited longer to get help, the outcome could have been much worse. You could have lost function in your hand. I nodded, too exhausted to speak. The physical pain was now impossible to ignore, a searing reminder of my parents' ultimate betrayal. They had literally left me bleeding to celebrate my brother's success over my failure. As I drifted in and out of consciousness, I made a decision that felt like finally breaking the surface after years of drowning. This was the last time my parents would ever have the power to hurt me. I was done. The next morning, my phone lit up with a text from my mother. "How's your arm? We had a lovely dinner with Jason. He sends his best." No apology, no acknowledgement of the severity of the situation, no recognition of their abandonment, just a casual inquiry as if I'd suffered a paper cut, rather than an injury that required surgical intervention. I stared at the message for a long time before handing my phone to Sarah, who had stayed overnight in the uncomfortable hospital chair despite my protests. She read it and looked up at me, eyes wide with disbelief. "Are they serious?" she asked. "Completely," I confirmed. "And that's actually more consideration than I expected. Usually they wouldn't have checked in at all." Sarah shook her head. "Madison, this isn't normal. You know that, right? Parents aren't supposed to leave their injured child to bleed while they go celebrate with another child. That's not just favoritism, it's neglect, possibly even criminal negligence." Her words struck me with their simple truth. Throughout my life, I had normalized my parents' behavior, accepting their emotional abandonment as somehow deserved. But this physical abandonment was impossible to rationalize away. "I know," I said quietly. "I think I've always known on some level. I just kept hoping things would change if I just achieved enough, proved myself enough." "And now?" Sarah prompted gently. I took a deep breath, feeling a strange combination of grief and relief wash over me. "Now I'm done. I'm going to cut them out of my life." Once the decision was made, I felt a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. Dr. Thompson had often suggested I needed stronger boundaries with my parents, but I had always resisted clinging to the fantasy that someday I could earn their love. Now that fantasy had been shattered beyond repair, and the path forward was suddenly obvious. I was discharged from the hospital the following day with my arm in a complex bandage and a prescription for physical therapy that would last months. The doctors warned that I might never regain full dexterity in my hand, a devastating prospect for a surgeon. When I returned to my apartment, I found it filled with flowers, food, and cards from my colleagues at the hospital. Not a single gift or message from my parents, though they had been informed of my surgery and prognosis. I waited until the fog of pain medication had cleared before making the call. My father answered on the fourth ring. "Madison, we were just talking about you," he said, his voice artificially bright. "Your mother and I were thinking of stopping by this weekend to see how you're doing." "That won't be necessary," I replied, my voice steady. "I'm calling to let you know that I won't be in contact with you or Mom anymore." There was a startled silence before my father laughed nervously. "Don't be ridiculous." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about the fact that you left me bleeding on the bathroom floor to celebrate Jason's fellowship. The same fellowship I had just been rejected from, which neither of you even asked about." "Now, Madison, you're blowing this out of proportion," my father said, his tone shifting to the condescending one he used when he thought I was being emotional. "We knew you weren't in any real danger. I required 3 hours of surgery to repair tendon damage," I responded clinically. "I lost enough blood that I needed a transfusion. The doctor said if I'd waited much longer, I could have lost function in my hand. As a surgeon, that would have ended my career." Another silence. I could almost see him adjusting his tie, a nervous habit he displayed when caught off guard. "We didn't realize it was that serious," he finally said, not quite an apology. "You didn't care to find out," I corrected him. "And that's the problem. That's always been the problem. I was never worth your time or concern compared to Jason." "That's not fair, Madison," my father protested. "We've always supported you. We paid for your education, your first apartment." "Financial support isn't the same as emotional support, Dad. You and Mom have made it clear throughout my life where your priorities lie. I've spent years trying to earn your approval, your attention, your love. I'm done trying." My mother's voice suddenly joined the conversation. She must have been listening on another extension. "Madison, you're being ungrateful. Every parent has favorites, we just try not to show it. At least we're honest about it. Her words stunned me into momentary silence. The casual cruelty, the blatant admission that I had always been right about being the lesser child in their eyes was breathtaking. When I found my voice again, it was surprisingly calm. Thank you for your honesty, Mom. It makes this easier. I won't be contacting you again, and I ask that you respect my decision not to hear from you either. You can't just cut us off, my father interjected, anger now evident in his voice. We're your parents. Yes, biologically you are. But parents are supposed to protect their children, support them, love them unconditionally. You've done none of those things consistently. The last time I needed you, you literally left me bleeding to celebrate Jason's success over my failure. That was the final evidence I needed that this relationship is toxic for me. This is absurd, my mother snapped. You're 32 years old, not some abandoned child. You're a doctor, for heaven's sake. Act like an adult. I am, I replied. An adult who's making the healthy choice to remove toxic influences from my life. Goodbye. I hung up before they could respond. My hand was shaking, but not from fear or uncertainty. For the first time in my adult life, I had stood up to my parents without backing down, without accepting their dismissal of my feelings, without apologizing for expecting the basic care that any child deserves from their parents. My phone immediately began ringing again. I silenced it and blocked both their numbers. Then I sent a brief text to Jason, explaining my decision. Despite everything, I didn't blame him for our parents' favoritism. He hadn't asked to be the golden child, any more than I had asked to be the disappointment. His response came quickly. I understand. I'm sorry it came to this. I'll respect your boundaries, but I'm here if you ever want to talk. At least one member of my family had some empathy. But even with Jason, I needed distance. Every interaction with him came with the shadow of our parents' comparison, and I needed to heal without that constant reminder of my perceived inadequacy. The next few weeks were surprisingly peaceful despite the physical pain and grueling physical therapy sessions. Without the weight of my parents' expectations and disappointments, I felt lighter. Dr. Thompson remarked on the change in our sessions. There's a new quality to your presence, she observed. You seem more present, less like you're waiting for judgment. I nodded. I feel like I've been holding my breath for 32 years, and I've finally exhaled. As my arm slowly healed, I made another significant decision. I applied for a position at Seattle Grace Hospital across the country from Boston and my parents. It wasn't the prestigious fellowship I had originally sought, but it was a fresh start in a city where I had no history, no family shadows to escape. To my surprise, I was offered not just an attending physician position, but also the opportunity to help develop a new pediatric emergency protocol. The hiring committee had been particularly impressed by a paper I had published on improving communication with young patients in crisis situations. When I submitted my resignation at Massachusetts General, my colleagues were shocked but supportive. Dr. Rivera took me aside after I announced my departure. "We'll miss you, Dr. Carter," he said sincerely. "But I think this move will be good for you. Sometimes we need physical distance to gain perspective." Sarah was devastated to lose her closest friend, but understood my need for a clean break. "Promise you'll actually use FaceTime," she demanded as she helped me pack up my apartment. "And I'm visiting at least twice a year, non-negotiable." 2 months after the bathroom incident, I boarded a plane to Seattle with 2 suitcases and a sense of possibility I hadn't felt since childhood. My arm was still healing the scar, a vivid reminder of what I had endured and overcome, but the physical therapy was showing promising results. In Seattle, I rented a small apartment with a view of Puget Sound. The constant presence of water and mountains was a stark contrast to the urban landscape of Boston, and I found the natural beauty soothing in ways I hadn't anticipated. My new colleagues were welcoming, particularly Amanda, a charge nurse in the emergency department, who took it upon herself to show me around the city and introduce me to her friends. She never pried when I was vague about my family, sensing my reluctance to discuss that part of my life. "Families can be complicated," she said simply when I declined an invitation to a holiday gathering. "My door's open if you ever want to talk about it." or if you just want company without questions. Dr. Thompson and I continued our sessions via video calls. The physical distance had created a new perspective on my family dynamics, allowing me to see patterns I had been too close to recognize before. I keep having this recurring thought, I told her during one session. What if my parents' approval had never been possible to earn? What if the game was rigged from the start? That's an important insight, she responded. Children often blame themselves when parents withhold love or approval, assuming they must be doing something wrong. But sometimes parents are simply incapable of giving what they themselves never received. This concept that my parents' emotional limitations weren't my fault was revolutionary. It allowed me to begin shifting from anger to something closer to pity. They were so trapped in their rigid expectations and conditional affection that they had lost the chance to truly know their daughter. 6 months into my new life in Seattle, I received an unexpected email from Jason. The subject line read simply, "When you're ready." The message itself was brief. "I respect your need for space and won't push, but there are some developments with Mom and Dad that you should know about when you feel able to hear them. Nothing urgent. I'm doing well at Johns Hopkins. Hope you're finding peace in Seattle." I stared at the screen for a long time before closing the email without responding. I wasn't ready to be pulled back into family dynamics, even peripherally. My healing had begun, but it was still fragile new roots just taking hold. Instead of responding, I threw myself into my work with renewed focus. I had started a support group for medical professionals dealing with burnout and mental health challenges, drawing on my own experiences to create a safe space for others to acknowledge their struggles without shame. The group quickly became one of the most fulfilling aspects of my new life. Seeing other healthcare workers find relief in shared experiences reminded me that my pain could have purpose. My history of anxiety and perfectionism, once sources of shame, had become valuable tools for connecting with and helping others. It was through this group that I met Ryan, a trauma surgeon with kind eyes and a quiet confidence that immediately put me at ease. He had joined the support group after losing a young patient, despite doing everything right, a loss that had triggered his own perfectionist tendencies and self-doubt. Over coffee after one session, Ryan shared his own complicated family history. Raised by a single mother who had struggled with addiction, he had put himself through medical school while caring for her during her recovery and relapses. "I became a doctor partly to fix things I couldn't fix in my own life," he admitted. "It took me years to realize that was an impossible standard to hold myself to." His honesty and self-awareness were refreshing. For the first time, I found myself opening up about my family without feeling judged or pitied. Ryan listened without trying to solve or minimize my experiences. Our friendship evolved naturally into something deeper, both of us proceeding with caution, born from past wounds. Ryan never pushed for more than I was ready to give, respecting the boundaries I had learned were essential for my well-being. Nearly a year after moving to Seattle, I received news that would significantly advance my career. My pediatric emergency protocol had been implemented in 3 other hospitals with remarkable success, reducing anxiety in young patients and improving treatment outcomes. I was invited to present the findings at an international medical conference in Chicago. The validation of my work, separate from any family expectations or comparisons, was profound. This was an achievement that was entirely my own, recognized on its merits rather than measured against someone else's accomplishments. As I prepared for the conference, I received another email from Jason. This one was more urgent. "Madison, I know you're still processing everything, but I need to tell you about Mom and Dad. Dad's law firm is being sued for malpractice. He's facing potential bankruptcy. Mom has been diagnosed with early-onset Parkinson's and had to close her practice. They're struggling, and I can't help them financially right now. Please call me." I sat with this information for days, discussing it in depth with Dr. Thompson. Part of me felt a vindictive satisfaction at my parents' reversal of fortune. After years of judging me for any perceived failure or shortcoming, they were now facing their own crises. "That's a natural reaction," Dr. Thompson assured me. "You're human and they hurt you deeply. The question isn't whether those feelings are justified, but what you want to do with them." What did I want to do? The question haunted me through sleepless nights and long walks along Seattle's waterfront. My parents had abandoned me when I needed them most. Did I owe them anything now that they were in need? I sought advice from the people I had come to trust. Sarah, still my fiercest advocate, was blunt. They made their choice when they left you bleeding. You don't owe them a damn thing. Amanda offered a more nuanced perspective. Family is complicated. Whatever you decide, make sure it's because it's what you want, not because of obligation or guilt. Ryan, who had been helping his mother through another difficult period of recovery, simply said, "Sometimes the hardest thing is to engage with the people who hurt us. But sometimes it's also the most healing if we can do it on our terms." After much reflection, I called Jason back. Our conversation was awkward at first, both of us carefully navigating this new terrain of adult siblings without parental interference. "How bad is it?" I asked after the initial pleasantries. Jason sighed heavily. "Pretty bad. Dad's firm is dissolving. The lawsuit exposed some ethical corners he cut years ago. He'll probably avoid disbarment, but his reputation is shot. They had to sell the house and move to a small apartment. Mom's tremors are getting worse and the medical bills are piling up. I'm sending what I can, but my fellowship stipend barely covers my own expenses." "Have they asked about me?" The question slipped out before I could stop it, that old need for validation briefly resurfacing. There was a pause before Jason answered honestly. "Not directly, but I think they're afraid to. Dad mentioned once that he regretted how things ended." It wasn't much, but it was more self-reflection than I had ever heard attributed to my father. "I need to think about this," I told Jason. "I can't just rush back into their lives." "I understand," he replied. "Just don't wait too long. Mom's condition is progressing faster than the doctors initially predicted." After ending the call, I sat in my living room watching the sun set over Puget Sound. The irony wasn't lost on me. After a lifetime of seeking my parents' approval and support, they now potentially needed mine. The power dynamic had shifted completely. I spent the next week in deep contemplation, journaling extensively and having extra sessions with Dr. Thompson. Gradually, I came to a decision that felt right for me, one based not on obligation or revenge, but on my own values and needs. "I'm going to Boston," I told Ryan over dinner at my apartment. "Not to rescue them, or even necessarily to reconcile, but to face this situation on my terms, with clear boundaries." He nodded, reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. "Would you like me to come with you?" Sometimes having support helps maintain those boundaries. His offer touched me deeply. "Thank you, but this is something I need to do alone. I need to know I can face them without needing protection or validation from someone else." The following week, I took a leave of absence from the hospital and boarded a flight to Boston. Sarah met me at the airport, insisting on being my home base during the visit. "You're staying with me," she declared, brooking no argument. "That way you have neutral territory to retreat to." The next morning, I drove to my parents' new apartment in a modest building on the outskirts of the city. The contrast to their former home was stark, the change in their circumstances immediately apparent. My mother answered the door and I barely recognized her. In just over a year, she had aged a decade. Her once perfectly colored and styled hair was now gray and thin, her posture stooped, her hand trembling visibly as she gripped the doorframe. "Madison," she whispered, shock evident in her voice. "I didn't know you were coming." "Jason told me what's been happening," I replied, keeping my voice neutral. "May I come in?" She stepped back wordlessly, allowing me to enter the small, cluttered apartment. My father sat in an armchair by the window, staring out at a view of the parking lot. He turned slowly at my entrance, and I saw the same dramatic aging in his face, new lines carved by stress and defeat. "Madison," he said, making a move to stand before sinking back into his chair. "This is unexpected." The awkward silence that followed was thick with unspoken words. Finally, my mother gestured toward the sofa. "Would you like some tea?" I nodded, taking a seat and observing them both clinically. My mother's tremors were indeed pronounced as she attempted to prepare the tea, spilling water and dropping a spoon with a clatter that made us all jump. "Let me help," I offered, moving to the kitchenette. As I prepared the tea, I noted the pill bottles lined up on the counter, the medical bills stacked beside them, the calendar marked with doctor's appointments. We sat in uncomfortable silence as we sipped our tea, none of us knowing how to bridge the chasm of hurt and estrangement that separated us. Finally, my father cleared his throat. "Jason told you about our situation, I assume?" "Yes," I replied simply. My father nodded, his eyes fixed on his teacup. "It's been a difficult year." "I'm familiar with difficult years," I said evenly. My mother flinched at that, her cup rattling against its saucer. For the first time, I saw something like shame cross her face. "Madison, about what happened," she began hesitantly. I raised a hand to stop her. "Before we talk about that day or anything else, I need you both to understand something. I'm not here out of obligation. I'm here because I've spent the past year working on myself, healing from the patterns of our relationship. I've created boundaries that allow me to engage with you without being damaged by you." My bluntness startled them both. These were not words the old Madison would have spoken, the daughter desperate for their approval and afraid to displease them. What happened that day in the bathroom was simply the culmination of a lifetime of being secondary in your priorities. I continued steadily. It was extreme, but not actually out of character for our family dynamic. My father started to protest, but I continued. "I'm not here to argue about perceptions. I'm here because despite everything, you are still my parents, and you're in trouble. But my help comes with conditions." They exchanged glances, clearly unused to me setting terms rather than accepting theirs. "What conditions?" my father asked cautiously. "First, acknowledgement. I need you both to understand and acknowledge how your treatment affected me not just that day, but throughout my life. Second, boundaries. If I help you, it will be on my terms with clear limits that you respect. Third, change. I need to see genuine efforts to create a healthier relationship, including family therapy with Dr. Thompson via video calls." My mother's hands trembled more violently as she set down her cup. "You want us to admit we were bad parents." "I want you to acknowledge the reality of our relationship," I corrected her. "Not to punish you, but because without that acknowledgement, nothing can change." My father stared at me for a long moment, then surprised me by nodding slowly. "Your mother and I have had a lot of time to think this past year. Losing everything, it forces a certain perspective." He looked down at his hands, once confident and commanding, now showing age spots and a slight tremor that mirrored my mother's more pronounced one. "When you cut us off, I was angry at first," he admitted. "I thought you were being dramatic, ungrateful. But then, as everything else fell apart, I started to see patterns. How I treated colleagues the same way I treated you, always expecting perfection, never offering genuine praise. It cost me my firm in the end." My mother wiped away a tear. "And I realized how I had always been jealous of you, Madison." This confession stunned me. "Jealous of me?" She nodded, not meeting my eyes. "You were always so naturally gifted. Things came easily to you that I had to work twice as hard for. Instead of being proud, I felt threatened. I pushed you harder because I didn't want you to know how much more talented you were than me. Then, when Jason came along, it was easier to focus on him because he didn't make me feel inadequate." Her admission left me speechless. All those years of striving for her approval, and she had been intimidated by me. The irony was almost too much to process. "That day," my father said quietly, "when we left you bleeding to celebrate Jason's fellowship, there's no excuse. None. I've replayed it 1,000 times, wondering how I could have made such an inhuman choice. All I can say is that I was so caught up in our family's toxic patterns that I couldn't see clearly anymore." I felt tears threatening but held them back. "Thank you for acknowledging that. It doesn't erase what happened, but it's a start." For the next 3 hours, we talked more honestly than we ever had before. My parents shared their fears about their future, the shame of financial ruin, the terror of my mother's progressing disease. I told them about my new life in Seattle, my work, the support system I had built. As the afternoon light began to fade, I outlined what I was willing to offer: financial assistance for my mother's medical care, help navigating health insurance options, and regular check-ins via phone, all contingent on their participation in family therapy and respect for my boundaries. "We don't deserve your help," my mother said softly. "This isn't about deserving," I replied. "It's about choosing the kind of person I want to be, regardless of how you've treated me. I'm offering help because it aligns with my values, not because you've earned it." As I prepared to leave, my father struggled to his feet and did something he hadn't done since I was a small child. He hugged me. It was awkward and brief, but genuine. "I'm proud of the woman you've become, Madison," he said gruffly. "Not because of your achievements, impressive as they are, but because of your character, your strength. And that has nothing to do with your mother and me. That's all you." Those words, so long craved and now finally offered, washed over me without the devastating impact they once would have had. I appreciated them, but I no longer needed them to validate my worth. That was perhaps the most profound evidence of my healing. 1 year after that first difficult reunion, I stand in my office at Seattle Grace Hospital, looking at the framed certificate on my wall. The International Medical Association has recognized my pediatric emergency protocol as a groundbreaking approach now implemented in hospitals across 12 countries. My career has flourished beyond what I could have imagined when I fled Boston. I've been promoted to head of the pediatric emergency department, published 2 significant papers, and been invited to consult on cases across the country. But the true measure of my growth isn't hanging on any wall or printed on any resume. It's in the balance I've found, the boundaries I maintain, and the relationships I've built on mutual respect, rather than conditional approval. My parents have settled into their new reality with more grace than I would have expected. My father found purpose volunteering at a legal aid clinic, using his expertise to help those who could never have afforded his former rates. My mother's Parkinson's has progressed, but a new medication regimen has helped manage her symptoms more effectively. Our monthly family therapy sessions with Dr. Thompson continue, sometimes difficult, but always honest. I visit Boston twice a year, staying with Sarah, rather than with my parents, maintaining the healthy distance I need. Jason and I have rebuilt our relationship as adult siblings without our parents' dynamics driving us apart. He's thriving at Johns Hopkins and recently became engaged to a fellow researcher. Most surprising has been the evolution of my relationship with Ryan. What began as friendship deepened into romance and then partnership. Last month, he proposed on a hiking trail overlooking Puget Sound, and I said yes without hesitation. The scar on my arm has faded from angry red to a silvery line, a permanent reminder of both trauma and resilience. I no longer hide it under long sleeves, just as I no longer hide the truth of my family history. In our support group for healthcare professionals, I often share my story as an example of how adversity can become strength, how the very experiences that wound us can ultimately become sources of empathy and connection. Healing isn't linear, I tell them. And it doesn't mean forgetting or even necessarily forgiving. It means reclaiming your power, establishing boundaries that protect you, and choosing relationships that nurture rather than diminish you. The most profound lesson I've learned is that sometimes the people who should love us the most are incapable of doing so in healthy ways. That doesn't reflect our worth, but their limitations. True healing comes not from changing them or earning their approval, but from breaking free of the need for either. My parents left me bleeding while they celebrated my brother's success. Now they're the ones who need support, and I've chosen to provide it on my terms, from a place of strength rather than need. The cycle of conditional love and desperate approval seeking has been broken. In its place, I've built a life defined not by what others think of me, but by what I know to be true about myself. Have you ever had to set boundaries with family members who hurt you? How did you balance self-protection with compassion? Please share your experiences in the comments below. If my story resonated with you, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to help others who might be struggling with similar family dynamics. Thank you for listening to my journey, and remember that healing is always possible, even from the deepest wounds.